Did you know that to fix parts of our air traffic control equipment, we turn to eBay? We heard that from a former official from the FAA. He's our guest today. I'm Jenna, and this is Smarter News. Lawmakers continue to ask questions about how safe it is to fly in America as the investigation continues into that deadly midair collision in Washington, D.C. David Grizzle has more than 40 years of experience in aviation, including as chief operating officer at the FAA, overseeing air traffic control. He's the perfect guest to ask the question, how safe are we? I began by learning more about his path to public service. So, David, you have a really interesting history in aviation, but I'm curious, how does one go from Harvard Law School to the Y&Z path that got you to the FAA? Talk to us a little bit about that. Was that in your vision when you were a law school student? Someday I'm going to be part of the FAA. How did that work out?
Not even remotely was it in my mind. I got there because I answered the phone and said yes to interesting proposals that came my way. And so that took me from one job to another. Eventually it took me to the FAA.
I was very interested to see your path, which included Continental Airlines. So you have some experience in the business world, obviously with commercial airlines. But there's a part in your past that I have to ask you a little bit about before we get to air traffic control. And this took place between 2004 and 2005, where it says you worked for the U.S. State Department as part of the Afghanistan Reconstruction Group. That stood out to me. David, what did you do as part of that effort?
I lived in a converted shipping container with 4 feet of sandbags on it for 14 months across the street from the U.S. Embassy. And my job was to coach the Afghan ministers involved with reconstruction of roads, aviation, telecommunications, and power. And the way I came to do that, as I said before, I answered the phone, but it really began earlier than that. I had always had a degree of regret that I had not served in Vietnam. After 9/11 occurred, I was desperate to serve my country in some distinctive way. And so when I received a call from Secretary Rumsfeld's office looking for someone to come over and head up the reconstruction there in Afghanistan, because he believed that USAID did not know how to do heavy reconstruction, and he thought that if he could get some corporate executives over there who knew about doing big projects, that we could make some progress. And so that's how I ended up doing it.
That's an amazing story. My husband's a combat veteran, and one of the things he talks about is that there's a lot of ways to serve your country. And you have, David. I mean, that's a fascinating, living in a shipping container in Afghanistan, again, may not be on the bingo card, right? When you're in
Exactly.
Harvard Law School. But what an experience, and what experience to bring back here to look at our transportation system. And
Yes.
as you mentioned, you eventually get to the FAA. What was that like, by the way? What was it like to work for the FAA?
Fortunately, I had worked with the State Department first. That was my first introduction into what it was like to work for the federal government. Working for the federal government is an utterly different world from working within a corporation. And I'm so grateful that I had this initial exposure with the federal government, even though it was in Afghanistan, because I realized that in the federal government generally, unlike in the private sector, success is optional. And that was a real jolt to me because I was used to setting objectives and accomplishing them without fail. Success was not merely optional. And so I fortunately had an adjustment to the way work is generally approached within the federal government. But I have to say that when I got to the FAA, it is a consummate group of professionals. They're mission driven, very well qualified, but they're under-resourced in multiple ways. They don't have enough money, they don't have enough leadership, and they don't have enough vision. But they are extremely capable professionals who want to do a great job.
Well, you have talked about for years this issue of air traffic control systems and how to update these systems. You've also worked, as we just talked about, under both Republican and Democrat administrations, which gives you a really interesting perspective. So let's zero in on air traffic control safety just in general. If you had to grade the air traffic control system in the United States, how would you grade it for us, David?
You have to grade it on different items. Let me start out safety. I would give it an A plus for safety. It is an extremely safe system. I need to qualify that, however. We buy safety at the expense of efficiency. And so we keep the system safe by slowing it down, by canceling flights, by making room in the airspace for our old equipment to be able to handle the airplanes. But unfortunately, we're at an inflection point now. We're at a place where our equipment is so old that even our extremely capable controllers and technicians are not able to prevent unscheduled outages in this equipment. And unscheduled outages cannot be managed with inefficiency. They cause problems, and we are seeing those more and more frequently because we finally reached a point with our equipment where it simply can't be repaired reliably.
How do you fix that?
You replace it entirely. We are more maintaining a technology museum than we are running an air traffic control system. We have technology that is so old that replacement parts have to be bought on eBay collector sites.
Come on, is that real, David?
It was certainly real when I was running air traffic control, and I imagine it's only gotten worse. And they no longer teach in schools how to repair this equipment. To give you an example, if you go onto one of Elon Musk's space vehicles and a card goes out in their flight director, someone goes in, pulls out the card, and sticks in a replacement card. At the FAA, when a card goes out on one of their displays, they send someone in who pulls out the card and then sits down with a soldering gun and starts to repair the card because the cards are no longer made. They have to be repaired. And that is what is causing us to reach this inflection point where we can no longer maintain safety with inefficiency.
So, but how is it not connected? Because when you're describing that we need to replace a whole system, that you got to bring out, hand tools to fix a card that needs to be fixed. I mean, that sounds dangerous to me. How has it not led to more safety concerns and a lower grade?
Well, again, we do have safety concerns, but thus far, we have been able to address all of these issues. I'm simply saying that we are reaching an inflection point where it will become more difficult to do that. And that's the reason, by the way, that I think that Secretary Duffy has jumped on this issue with an energy and a determination that I have not seen from any secretary in my 40 years of being in the airline industry. He gets it.
It sounds like you're excited about that.
I am. Traditionally, even though the FAA is like 60% of the entire Department of Transportation, it received very little attention from the Secretary because it was more politically advantageous for them to focus on road projects. Secretary Duffy is completely different. He understands the risks that we face right now and the need of the American traveling public to have a world-class air traffic control system.
Well, and part of that wasn't by choice. I mean, we can imagine. I'm not inside his own strategic thinking, but we had that horrific crash that happened at Reagan National Airport that immediately put a lot of questions about air traffic control and travel safety to the forefront of all of our minds. There were reports that there was maybe one individual that was in the air traffic control at the time. That's not true. We know that there was a handful of individuals. But what about the staffing, David? Staffing seems to be something that we hear about all the time. We get told something about staffing if our planes are delayed and the weather is perfect. What about the personnel part? If safety gets an A+ and technology, we're reading between the lines, probably doesn't get a passing grade, what about personnel when it comes to air traffic control?
I'm not going to speak about DCA because that's the NTSB's job to speak about that. But let me say that we are behind several thousand air traffic controllers, and at the pace that we are on right this minute to hire more air traffic controllers, by 2030 we will have only marginally changed the number of controllers that we have because we are also at a generational high level of retirements, plus people are attriting out at an unprecedented level because they're simply burned out. And so although we are increasing our hiring of air traffic controllers, we have to ramp it up far more because we're having to cover the people who are departing the system at this point. And it's made difficult because again, in air traffic control training, it's just like our air navigational systems. It's outmoded. We don't have modern simulators in most of our facilities the way a basic airline has for training their pilots.
What will it take then, David, when we're talking about replacing the equipment, getting a better training system in place? These sound like really expensive, time-consuming tasks, but you've seen it from a lot of different angles. So give us your best game plan. How do we fix it?
It's going to take a lot of money, and just as important as the amount of money is the lack of interruption in the money. The FAA suffers mightily from the stop and start nature of federal appropriations. Every time there's even a risk of a federal shutdown, the FAA needs to give stop order instructions to its contractors. They begin expending money, laying off people, preparing for a budget failure. And even if the budget failure doesn't occur, the FAA incurs tens of millions of expenses in make-ready expenses in the anticipation of the shutdown. The second thing we need to do is to have leadership that uses the special procurement powers that the FAA has to bring in equipment that is not like most of the equipment in the federal system, which because of the federal procurement system, it is designed to come in over budget and late. And the FAA has the authority to procure equipment in a different fashion. The final thing we need to have a BRAC type commission. You're probably too young even to remember the BRAC, the Base
David.
the Base Realignment and Closure Act, which was the only way that we were able to start shutting down military bases that were no longer needed. And we need a system in place so that the FAA is able to shut down archaic facilities and navigation aids without someone in some political position coming in and blocking them from doing it. Right now, 90% of our facilities and equipment budget is spent just on maintaining old equipment.
I'm sorry, 90%?
90% is spent just on maintaining old equipment. So we have less than 10% of the budget that Congress gives the FAA for facilities and equipment to spend on anything new.
As you see it, is it possible to repair this system piecemeal? For example, to look at the nation's busiest airports and start there, or start at how do you do it with the system that we have in place?
That is the best question you could have possibly asked. And the answer is that we in fact have to do it in an iterative and incremental way. We just have to start. We start with with a risk-adjusted priority list. Do the most dangerous facilities first. Do them. We will learn things in replacing them that we will then carry on to the next riskiest facility. And so yes, we need to do it one by one, but continue doing it as we learn better about the best ways to do it.
It sounds like a monumental task. And at the same time, it feels like it's just too big of a priority to ignore, as you mentioned. So hopefully there's some momentum to continue to work towards the solution. Before I let you go, I just have to ask you this question. Knowing all that you know about the system, how do you feel flying, David? I mean, a lot of families are going to be on planes this summer. There's a lot of people traveling for business on a regular basis. We're hearing all these things about what's going on at different airports or near misses. It's a lot as a consumer to take in. And it's easy for even a confident flyer to wonder, is this actually safe? How do you answer that question?
Let me answer it by telling you about a time I was testifying in Congress when a congresswoman at the end of my testimony asked me, "Mr. Grizzle, what is the safest airport in America?" And I said, "It is the airport closest to your home." And she said, "I'm sorry, what did you say?" I said, "It is the airport closest to your home." She said, "I don't understand." I said, "You must realize the most dangerous part of your air journey is simply driving to the airport. Once you get to the airport, you descend into a cone of safety that is unprecedented anywhere else in your life. And so I feel great once I get to the airport."
David, it's so nice to have you. Thank you for your insight today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.